Hey, folks, here is a 10-minute highlight reel of the next big idea for those of you short on time. For the full conversation, follow us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Will Storr, welcome back to the next big idea.
Thanks, Caleb. It's great to be here. I'm happy to be here again.
I feel like before we get too much further, we should just zoom out and define story. Like, what is your definition, Will, of story?
Well, I mean, in its most technical sense, a story is a unit of information that tells of the overcoming of an obstacle in pursuit of a goal. Like that's the basic elements of a story. If you don't have something overcoming an obstacle in pursuit of a goal, you don't have a story. You've got something else. You've got a scientific paper or a poem or something. So in order to have a story, it's got to have the obstacle. It's got to have the goal.
And you say that sort of all stories lead to sort of three themes, right? These archetypal underpinnings of all great stories. What are those three things?
Yeah, so I think to understand that, you've got to kind of understand the human being and this kind of weird storytelling animal that we are. Like, we're an ape. Like, we're not like an ape. We are an ape. We're one of 5 species of ape. But obviously, we're very different from the other apes. We're not like the chimpanzee and the orangutan anymore. And the difference is that we tell stories. We tell stories that enable us to be highly collaborative, highly cooperative. So unlike the other apes, we don't pursue our goals and overcome obstacles as individuals. We do it as groups, as teams, with everybody sort of playing their part. And it's that teamwork, that cooperation that's enabled us to take over the planet. And it's story that allows us to do that. So story is this device for fusing human brains together. Under the power of a story, we all face the same direction. We all have the same idea about who are the heroes, who are the villains, what are the obstacles, what are our goals, what does our happy ending look like. So it fuses these brains together and gets us all thinking as one, this one kind of groupish kind of super organism. So that's why, I argue that story has always got to be about obstacles and goals, because story is about getting a group of individual people to overcome obstacles in pursuit of goals, as if they're one, as if they're a hive of ants. And what are the big obstacles and goals? Well, for humans, on one level, we're like every other animal. We want survival, so we want food and water and shelter, and we want our kids to survive and want to procreate. But we're also, because we're this groupish animal, we have these other 2 instincts which compel us to be successful members of this, the group, the human superorganism. The first one is that we are driven to seek connection. So we want to be accepted by other humans, whether that's romantic partners, our family, our friends, our colleagues. We all want to seek connection, and we all fear and dread ostracization, social rejection. That's a human universal. Yeah. And then once we're in that superorganism, we are driven to want status. So status is just the feeling of, I am valued by my group. I am offering it value. I'm respected. There is something about what I'm doing which is benefiting the group. So those are the 3 things: survival, connection, and status. These are the three themes of all archetypal stories. Mm-hmm. Like in the world of films, film like The Revenant is about survival.
Right.
A film like Brokeback Mountain is about connection. A film like Barbie or Whiplash is about status. Mm-hmm. And the movies, the stories that we feel are timeless and are so rich with meaning that we can see them again and again and again, whether it's The Godfather or Star Wars or Romeo and Juliet. These are about survival and connection and status in kind of equal proportions. They're about all the great themes of life. And I think that's why they're so rich and timeless, those stories.
Tell me if I'm getting this right. Okay, so stories allow us to collaborate, to find people like us and commit with them to overcome obstacles, achieve goals that we couldn't achieve on our own. This is a superpower, but at the same time, out of necessity, stories are oversimplifications. They're lies, we might even say. And meanwhile, we have this instinct to agree on common stories, to converge in our beliefs to a degree that's almost unsettling. I mean, there's kind of good news here about, like, we're so powerfully collaborative, and we want to connect with each other, and we want to help each other overcome obstacles. But there's also a slightly sort of dark underbelly to this, which is our ability to be deceived and deceive ourselves in this process is powerful.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the brain is not a calculator of fact and truth. The brain's not interested particularly in the truth. The brain's interested in the story, that idea of who do I have to be in this time and place in order to become a hero. And every group has its own story, is its own little micro story world. You go to work for an organization, they've got their own story about what it means to be a good member of this team in particular. And if you identify with that story, if you're going to turn yourself into that kind of person. So we're constantly, shape shifting. We live in multiple story worlds at once in a way. Maybe we'll go to church, maybe we'll go and play soccer, maybe we're going to go and volunteer for this organization, maybe we're going to be a family man, maybe we're going to be a lover. All these different identities we have, these roles we play. Each one is a kind of different version of ourselves. Each one represents a different kind of story world that we're existing in at any one time. And our beliefs, our personality changes. Our beliefs can change under the power of story, as study after study has shown.
You use the word shape-shifting and beliefs, and in the book you use the word magic, that there's something it feels almost like magic, this way that we adjust our identities and merge with other people. And I mean, I have to say, occasionally, like, that almost sounds kind of woo-woo, like, oh, it's magic, we're shape-shifting. So ground this. You just mentioned there are studies that back this up over and over again. Ground this a little bit for us in the science that shows this identification with people like us, this merging, the shape-shifting is actually a scientific fact.
Yeah, it's been found time and time again in lots and lots of different contexts. One example which I like is about architects and architecture. So
That's a great one.
You might have looked out into the world, over the last 100 years and seen that modern buildings tend to look a certain way. They're rectangular, they're shiny, they're kind of boring. They have flat roofs. You don't see pitch roofs anymore. I used to think that was because that's just a cheap way to make buildings, but that turns out not to be true. The reason that modern architecture looks like modern architecture is because architects think it's beautiful. And so what's interesting about that is that when you do surveys, no matter where you go in the world, architects think big shiny rectangles are beautiful, but most other people don't. Most other people like curves, they like detail, they like a building that shows a sense of its geographical location.
Yeah, give me a gargoyle, please.
Exactly. So that begs the question: how is it that the people building our buildings have this different aesthetic to the rest of the world? Or like, how does that come about? So there was a psychologist over here who studied that, and they studied the preferences of young architects as they went through the process of going to university. Well, at first they tested their sense of aesthetics generally with the general public. So they said, here are some pictures of some people. Tell us who you think are beautiful and tell us who you think are not beautiful. Rate them out of 10 in that way that people sometimes do. So they did that, and they found that there was no difference. In terms of like human beauty, between the general public and the young architects, there was no difference. Buildings, there was a small difference, but not much difference. They kind of like the same buildings. But then they kept assessing them as they went through the long process of being educated in architecture. And they found that the longer they've been being educated to be an architect, the more they like straight lines, squares, grid patterns, flat roofs, all the things that we associate with ugly, boring modern architecture. And what's really interesting about that for me is that you can't argue that it's because architects have got this amazing, like, sophisticated, they'll go on these crazy esoteric journeys where they discover their own version of beauty. They're not, they're completely conformist. They're all like the same bloody buildings. It's, so they're not being creative or interesting. And it's all about the story. It's, their aesthetic, their tastes are transformed as they go to university. They meet high status architects, people they're impressed with, and they absorb their aesthetic tastes. We're constantly changing who we are, changing what we think is beautiful, changing our political beliefs, changing our personalities. But we've got this storytelling brain that tells us, no. You decided that. They call it confabulation. We confabulate this this deciding character in our brains that's making these decisions. And actually, it's all subconscious. Well, no, that's too much. It's not all subconscious. A lot of it is subconscious. We're being pulled around by our subconscious. So when I say it's like magic, it is a bit like magic. It's this sort of dark magic that's controlling us beneath the level of conscious awareness.
You say at one point that we each emit, quote, a dense cloud of social information that transmits clues about who we are and how we perceive the external world.
I can see clouds floating off of both of you right now.
That's right. but that's it. So we're all desperately interested in connecting successfully and earning status with people, but not with anybody, with people like us, with people that our subconscious mind single out and think that's somebody that I can collaborate with. That's somebody that can be a collaborative partner and help, and we could work together overcoming the obstacles of life. So we're constantly seeking out these people. But part of that means we're constantly driven to broadcast to other people, who am I?
Yeah.
So much of the money we spend is about our identity, broadcasting who we are. And we do that in order to attract people like us to our lives, and also to repel people not like us. Like even now, Rufus, like we don't, we've done podcasts before, but look, we've got very similar hair, we've got very similar shirts.
Yeah, you guys do.
We're even a similar weight. I've got books in
yeah.
the background. You've got this cool brick thing. Like, there's all this subconscious stuff in our backgrounds, which is saying that we have things deeply in common. Like.
So wait, Will, are you saying we don't have anything in common?
You're a bit young, Caleb. But no, you do. I mean, you can just tell. I mean, you could just tell all three of us. We've even So it's a really sort of powerful thing that's sort of changed the way I see human beings. Is that we're so concerned with broadcasting our identity to other people, and that's because we're looking for collaborative partners.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So that was the end of 1984, which is still considered by some to be the greatest commercial ever made. To understand why that was so successful, you've got to understand the story world as it was in the 1980s. And back in the 1980s, this was pre-tech internet revolution. This was a time when people genuinely believed that 1984 might happen. The Cold War was still on. There was a fear. There's a fear re-emerging now with AI, but there was a big fear then that computers were not our friends, that they were going to be the tool of these totalitarian people, that the future was going to be one of control, control by the machines. And what Apple was saying was like, we hear you, we understand your concerns, but this is not Apple. Apple are standing against this. Apple are about individuality, creativity, freedom. And, all these values absolutely resonated with the audience of boomer Americans, which were watching, that ad. And they responded just enormously. Like, so in the weeks, in the 100 days after that ad was shown, they bought nearly $180 million worth of Macs, which is over $500 million worth today. And the then product manager said we could have sold 200,000 Macs if we could have built them. So it just had an extraordinary result. And I think that one of the amazing things about that ad was when they were making the ad, Steve Jobs and his team still hadn't figured out what the Mac was going to be. So they had no information. So that ad is telling you nothing whatsoever about the computer. Yeah. It doesn't even show the computer because it wasn't finished yet. So despite not telling you anything at all about what the computer was, it was extraordinarily successful because it was doing all of those things. It was showing an obstacle and a goal and a goal, and somebody struggling over that obstacle. But it was also, people strongly identified with its message, which was that you're right to fear computers. Yeah. You're right to fear IBM and the domination of the machines. But that's why you need to buy an Apple, because Apple are the opposite of that. And and people talk about this ad, and I think they're right. They say that this advert didn't only redefine the story of Apple. Yeah. This ad redefined the story of what personal computers were. We're still telling versions of that story today in the post internet revolution about technology being about liberation and creativity and freedom and self-expression. All of that was invented in that 1984 ad.